As we settled, from the moment my father remarried, there was a palpable tension in the air. I had always been wary of change, especially when it involved the people closest to me. I was 13 when my dad introduced Evelyn, his new fiancée, to me. At first glance, she seemed pleasant, graceful and composed with delicate features and a warm smile. She was the type of woman my father had always dreamed of. Calm, intelligent, and seemingly perfect in every way. However, there was something unsettling about her that I couldn't ignore. Evelyn's demeanor was cold and composed. While she was polite, there was a noticeable emotional distance between us. She would often speak in a soft, measured tone, as if she were always choosing her words carefully. Her smiles, though frequent, never quite reached her eyes. They were thin and rehearsed, like a mask hiding something deeper. I noticed how she would stare at me sometimes, but there was a strange emptiness in her gaze. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it made my skin crawl. She had an air of control, as though she was in charge of everything around her, even the way we interacted. It wasn't just me. There was a peculiar shift in the atmosphere whenever she was around. I wasn't the only one who felt it. The more I observed her, the more I began to see small details that made me uneasy. The way she moved, slow and deliberate, as if every step was calculated. The way she spoke to my father, always with such confidence, like she held all the power in the relationship. It was as if my presence didn't matter to her at all, as if she viewed me as an obstacle to her life with my father, something to be tolerated rather than embraced. One evening, while we sat around the dinner table, my father laughed and spoke with Evelyn about their plans for the future. I was just a silent observer in the conversation, but Evelyn's eyes kept flicking over to me. They lingered just a little too long, and when our gazes met, she offered a tight, almost forced smile. "You'll love the new house," she said, her voice cool and measured. "It's perfect for all of us." I didn't respond. I didn't trust her words. The idea of living with her in a new house, in a new life, made my stomach turn. My father, of course, seemed completely blinded by her charm. He didn't see the subtle manipulation, the chilling distance between us. To him, she was the ideal woman, the one who filled the void my mother had left behind. Despite my unease, I never spoke out. I didn't have the courage to question my father's judgment, and I convinced myself that maybe I was just being dramatic. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Evelyn wasn't just my new stepmother, she was something else, something I couldn't explain. And I feared that this new chapter in my life wouldn't just change things on the surface, it would change everything. After their marriage, we moved into Evelyn's old house. It was a large Victorian-style mansion tucked away on the edge of town, surrounded by dense woods. The house was beautiful in a way that felt almost too perfect. Its tall, narrow windows, the sprawling garden in the back, and the ornate moldings that lined every hallway. It looked like a place where nothing could go wrong, a place where everything was carefully curated and polished. But beneath the surface, something felt off. The first time I stepped into the house, I felt an unsettling chill in the air. The walls, though freshly painted, seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if the house had been waiting for someone to claim it for years. The scent of lavender, which Evelyn insisted on using throughout the house, lingered in the air. But there was something else hidden beneath it. A musty, almost rotten odor, like the house had secrets buried deep within its walls. It was the kind of smell that made you wonder how long it had been since anyone truly lived there. Despite the outward beauty, there was a heaviness in the atmosphere. The house was large, far larger than any home I had ever lived in before. The high ceilings and long hallways made it feel even more imposing, as if I were wandering through a labyrinth of cold, impersonal rooms. The house didn't feel lived in, not in the way a home should. It felt as though it was more of a museum, a place where memories were suspended in time, forever trapped within the walls. The feeling of unease only grew. The house was too quiet, too still. At night, the silence became almost oppressive. The occasional creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind outside, the hum of the heating system, all of it felt unnatural, like the house itself was alive and aware of our presence. Evelyn, of course, insisted that the house was perfect for us. She seemed at ease there, as though it was exactly where she belonged. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something about this house that I didn't. Something that made her act differently, distant, secretive, as if there was an unspoken history here that she didn't want to reveal. And as the days went by, I began to feel like I was being watched. It wasn't just the feeling of being in a strange place. It was as though the house itself was observing me, waiting for me to uncover whatever dark secret it held. I started to notice things I hadn't before, objects that seemed out of place, rooms that felt colder than others, and strange markings on the walls that I couldn't explain. But when I asked Evelyn about them, she would just smile and brush it off. "This house is just old," she would say, her voice smooth and reassuring. "It has its quirks, but it's safe. Don't worry about it." I wanted to believe her, but every night as I lay in my new room, the whispers began. They were faint at first, like the rustle of leaves outside, but over time they grew louder, almost like someone was calling my name. I couldn't ignore them. Something was wrong with this house, and I was starting to realize that something was wrong with Evelyn too. It was one of the first nights we spent in the house that the whispers started. At first, they were so faint I thought I was imagining it. Soft, indistinct murmurs drifting through the hallways, too far away to make sense of, but each night, they became more distinct. I would wake in the middle of the night to the sound of my name being called, a voice that wasn't my own, echoing from the dark corners of the house. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that it was just the house settling, that I was hearing things due to the strange new environment, but the whispers continued, growing more insistent, always soft, always just beyond my reach. It was as though someone, or something, was trying to communicate with me. I would lie awake, my heart pounding, straining to listen, trying to make sense of the words. One night as I lay in bed, the voice came again, louder than ever before. "Come closer," it whispered, so close I could feel it brushing against my ear. My body went rigid with fear. The voice was not Evelyn's. It was soft, but sharp, like a hidden presence in the room. It wasn't the kind of whisper I would expect from an old house. This was something different, something alive. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, and rushed into the hallway. The house was silent again, but I could feel it. There was a presence, an energy, that seemed to be drawing me toward something. I didn't know where it was coming from, but it felt like the house itself was reaching out to me. I asked Evelyn about it the next morning, trying to brush it off as just a bad dream. But when I mentioned the voices, her expression changed, just for a moment. Her eyes darkened and she smiled tightly. "You're just hearing things," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "The house is old. It's full of creaks and groans. Don't worry about it." But I knew it wasn't just the house. I had heard those voices before, somewhere in my dreams, somewhere in the depths of my subconscious. It was as if the house had awakened something in me, something I wasn't ready to face. That night the whispers came again, but this time they weren't just whispers. They were clearer, stronger, more persistent. I could hear the words now, calling me by name, urging me to follow them. I couldn't ignore them any longer. The whispers led me to the attic. It started with a pull, a strange compulsion I couldn't explain. I had never been up there before. Evelyn had always kept the door locked, telling me it was off limits. But something told me that if I went up there, I would find the answers to the questions that had been gnawing at me for weeks. One night after Evelyn had gone to bed, I couldn't resist any longer. I found the key to the attic door, hidden in a drawer in the hallway. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the door, my pulse quickening with every step I took toward the attic stairs. The attic was cold, the air thick with dust and age. I shivered as I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The attic was filled with old furniture, broken chairs, forgotten boxes, and strange relics from a past I didn't understand. But the most disturbing thing was the large, ornate mirror that stood in the far corner of the room. It was old, its frame covered in intricate carvings, and its surface seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Evelyn was standing in front of it when I entered. She didn't turn around when I stepped inside. She was completely still, staring at her reflection. Her posture was unnaturally rigid, and the expression on her face was unreadable. She didn't speak at first. It was as if time had stopped and everything was suspended in that moment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she slowly turned toward me. Her smile was wide, but it was wrong. Too wide, too forced. Her eyes were dark, hollow, as if something had drained the life from her. She didn't look like the woman I had known. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly, her voice too smooth, too calm. "This is where it all begins." My heart raced as I backed away, but something in the way she spoke held me captive. I didn't know what she meant, but it was clear she wasn't the same woman who had married my father, and the attic, the house itself, wasn't just a home. It was something much darker. After my unsettling encounter with Evelyn in the attic, things around the house grew more strange and sinister. She became increasingly distant, often disappearing for long stretches of time, leaving me to fend for myself in the silent, suffocating atmosphere of the house. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched constantly, my every move observed by unseen eyes. I had tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something was growing inside the walls of that house. As I spent more time alone in the house, the whispers became louder, more insistent. They were no longer just faint echoes. Now they were clear, unmistakable. "Come closer," they would say, each whisper like a cold breath against my ear. The whispers seemed to follow me wherever I went, pulling me toward the attic door, the one Evelyn had warned me never to open. Despite the warnings, I couldn't resist. The call was too strong, like a magnetic pull that made my feet move on their own, leading me back to that place where everything had changed. One night after dinner, Evelyn disappeared again. She had told me she was going out for a while, but something in her voice made me uneasy. Her eyes were darker than usual, her movements stiff and mechanical. I couldn't explain it, but I had the distinct impression that she wasn't going out to do something ordinary. She was preparing for something. The thought that she might be preparing something sinister made my stomach churn, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Instead, I made my way to the attic, my heart pounding in my chest. The door to the attic was ajar when I reached it, as if someone or something was waiting for me. The shadows seemed to crawl along the walls, their edges stretching like fingers beckoning me to come closer. My body was frozen in fear, but my legs moved without my consent, carrying me up the creaky stairs and into the attic. When I entered, the room felt different. The air was thick, heavy with an unnatural coldness. The attic, once filled with old furniture and dusty relics, was now eerily bare. Except for the large mirror in the far corner, the glass reflected only darkness, the surface like a void that seemed to swallow everything around it. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stepped closer, and the whispers came again, louder this time, echoing from the darkness. "Come closer. It's time." I wanted to turn and run, but something held me in place. It was as if the mirror was calling to me, offering some terrible truth that I couldn't ignore. And then, from the shadows, Evelyn appeared. But she wasn't the woman I had come to know. She was different, darker, more twisted. Her eyes were completely black, her smile stretched unnaturally wide, and her skin seemed pale, almost translucent. She looked like something out of a nightmare. "You're here," she said, her voice low and smooth, as if she had been expecting me all along. "It's time for you to join us." I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move or speak. Evelyn stepped closer, her cold hand brushing against my cheek. The coldness seeped into my skin, spreading through my veins like ice. "You belong here," she whispered. "You were always meant to be a part of this." Her words were like a spell, a dark incantation that filled my head with a sense of inevitability. I felt like I was falling into the mirror, my reflection warping into something that wasn't me. The whispers grew louder, now deafening, and I could hear them clearly, all of them. Voices from the past, from the house, from Evelyn. They all called me to the mirror, urging me to step into the darkness. "Don't fight it," Evelyn cooed. "It's too late for that. You've been chosen. It's time for you to see the truth." I couldn't resist anymore. The pull of the mirror was too strong, and before I knew it, I was standing before it, gazing into the abyss that seemed to stretch on forever. I could see flashes of movement, shadowy figures, faces contorted in pain, their mouths open in silent screams. They were all trapped, just like me, and I realized with horror that the mirror was not just a reflection. It was a portal to something far darker. Something alive. Evelyn's voice was the last thing I heard before everything went black. "You're mine now." The next few moments were a blur. I felt myself falling, my body weightless, as though I had stepped into the mirror itself. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could feel was the oppressive darkness that surrounded me. My mind was filled with chaos, frantic images flashing by, voices overlapping, calling my name, begging for help. But I couldn't understand what they were saying. I couldn't make sense of anything. When I finally regained consciousness, I was no longer in the attic. I wasn't in the house at all. Instead, I was standing in a dark, cold place, a place that seemed to exist outside of time and space. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground beneath my feet was soft as though it were made of something unnatural. I could hear movement around me, but when I turned, there was nothing to see. Only shadows, creeping along the edges of my vision. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I turned sharply to find Evelyn standing beside me. Her eyes still black, her smile still stretched too wide. She didn't look like a human anymore. She was something else entirely. Something ancient. Her voice echoed in my mind as though she was speaking directly into my thoughts. "You're here now," she said softly. "This is where you belong. This is your home." I tried to speak, but no words came out. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. It was as though I was frozen in place, trapped in this dark, hellish world where nothing made sense. And then, I saw them. The other faces. Figures that were once people, now twisted and distorted, their bodies contorted in ways that defied nature. They reached out to me, their hands clawing at the air, their eyes wide with fear and agony. "Help us," one of them whispered. But there was nothing I could do. I was trapped here, just like them, bound to this place by forces I didn't understand. "You can never leave," Evelyn's voice echoed in the darkness. "You're one of us now. You're part of this." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Evelyn hadn't just been preparing me for something, she had been preparing me for this. The house, the mirror, the whispers, they were all part of the same twisted plan. She had lured me in just as she had done with the others before me, and now I was trapped here too. Forever. Days, or perhaps weeks, passed. Time lost all meaning in this dark, cursed place. I had no sense of day or night, no understanding of how long I had been trapped. The other souls here seemed as lost as I was, wandering in a haze, unable to remember who they once were. But they all shared one thing in common. They had all been chosen by Evelyn. The whispers still filled my head, but now they weren't the soft murmurs they used to be. Now they were urgent, frantic, clawing at my mind. "Leave now, escape," they urged, but I had no idea how. The darkness around me seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive with each passing moment. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I caught sight of Evelyn again, standing at the edge of the shadows, her black eyes gleaming in the dim light. She was watching me, a smile creeping across her face. "You can't escape," she said, her voice carrying a strange finality. "You belong to me now, there is no going back." And then, the whispers came again. But this time they weren't just in my head, they were real. They filled the air, a chorus of tortured voices, all crying out at once. "You will never leave." It was in that moment I realized that Evelyn had become something much more than just a woman. She had become the embodiment of this place, this nightmare, this prison. And now, she was holding me here, keeping me locked away, just as she had done with the others. There was no escape, not for me, not for anyone. In the depths of my despair, as I walked through the endless darkness, I realized one terrifying truth. Evelyn's hold on me was stronger than I had ever imagined, but even as I felt the weight of her power pressing down on me, a spark of resistance flared inside me. I wasn't going to let her win, not without a fight. With every ounce of strength I had left, I forced myself to move, to walk toward the faintest sliver of light that shone through the endless blackness. The whispers screamed at me, telling me to stop, to turn back, but I didn't listen. I couldn't. I had to escape. I pushed forward, my heart pounding in my chest, until I saw it, the attic door. But as I reached for it, Evelyn's voice rang out, cold and final. "You can't leave, you're mine now." I stepped into the light, feeling the oppressive darkness finally start to fade. And then, nothing. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in my bed. The house was quiet and I felt an eerie calm. But I knew something had changed. Something deep inside me had shifted, and the house, the whispers, and Evelyn's dark presence were gone. For now. But I knew deep down that I could never escape her. Not completely, because she would always be watching.